Hey everyone, welcome back to KBS Technocraft Python tutorial day 11 unit test part 4. Today in this tutorial we are going to understand mock, patch and magic mock using a real-time scenario. I have divided this tutorial in three sections. In the first section where we are going to understand what is mock, patch and magic mock, and the second section where we are going to discuss how to use mock, patch and magic mock using a real-time scenario. And the third and final section where we are going to discuss advantage of mock, patch and magic mock. Before we dive into today's videos, I would recommend you to go through the unit test part 1 and 2 tutorial in which I have covered the environment setup and fundamentals of unit testing. And also, I just want to take a moment to invite you to join my channel KBS Technocraft. If you like what you see, please consider hitting the subscribe button. So let's move on environment setup. Before we proceed on technical exercise, we will try to understand what environment setup is required. So for this tutorial, I have created a folder called mock exercise, and you can use manual process of creating folder. I just created using command prompt. So if you want, you can use using command prompt as well. So I created a folder called mock exercise, and then I opened that particular folder in Visual Studio Code, and then I try to set up the environment. To do environment setup, you have to select Python create environment, and then once you select this, it will ask you whether you want to use virtual environment or conda. So I used virtual environment. So once you select that virtual create virtual environment, then it will ask you to select the Python version. If there are multiple versions installed on your system, then it will ask. In my system there are multiple versions installed on my system, so that's why it's asking. I select the appropriate version, any version I can select it. So I selected 3.10.11, and then I click on that, and then it will take some time to create environments. If you see right hand side bottom, there is environment is creating, the message is displaying environment creating. So after a few minutes, you can see that the environment is created, and to validate that, you can see this .env file is created, under which we can see multiple folder include library, script and other folders are created. So before we proceed on technical exercise, we will try to understand at high level what is this mock, patch and magic mock, and then we will take one by one scenario and example, and we will try to work on that. So mock, patch and magic mock are three powerful tools provided by the Python unit test.mock module for testing and mocking purpose. These tools allow developer to replace part of a system under test with the mock object that can simulate the behavior of original object. For example, if you have a class or a component which inject or which used other component or class, but when you are trying to do the unit testing, you want to mock that behavior or mimic the behavior of the other class on which your current class or current component is depend. In that case, we will use mock. This mock, patch and magic mock, all three serves a particular purpose, allowing a particular object or component or class to be mocked. So there are multiple way to do that. These are the three different way of doing same or achieving same mocking. Okay, so what is mock? Mock is a class that allow you to create a mock object that can be used in place of real uh, object during the testing. A mock object is a dummy object that mimics the behavior of real object in the controlled way. It can be used to test the interaction between different components of a system. So we will understand this in more detail by considering a particular example. To do that example, we will first try to understand very basic of mock. So I'm going to create a file here, and I'm just going to give a name as a test basic mock, and then I will, and here I'm going to import unit test module, and then I'm going to write a simple code which will mock a simple object over there. In this example, we have imported unit test, and then we have also imported unit test.mock here. And then in this, we have created a class. In this class, we have inherited this class from the test class. And then I have defined a function test verify simple mock. And then I have created a object of mock here. And then I set up a value 56. I can set up any value, whatever I want to assert it. Assert in the sense verify it. So I just put 12, and here also 12. So then I define a variable where I am whatever the mock object I am created, I just called here, and then I'm putting assert on this. And then what I'm doing here is that I'm calling that unit test main here. It's very simple. uh, I have explained all this into the unit test part 1. So it's very simple test case where we created a simple mock object, and then we have define a value, a return value 12, and then we put our assert here. So if you run this test case, we'll be able to see this test case is getting passed, because whatever we have arranged, same thing we are putting on assert. So this passing. For example, if I change this 12 to 14, that means I arrange the value 14 or set up the value 14 for this mark object to return it, but I'm just asserting 12. That means this test case will fail. So if you see, this test case is getting failed because result is not equal to 12. That means whatever we are returning from functions, this mark setup is 14, but we are testing 12. So if I make it 14 here, it will be passed. So just to highlight here, it's just very simple test case where we are not having any class. We are just creating a mock object, and then we are setting a simple value, and then we are trying to put a assert on that just to understand this mocking concept. How does it works? So if you see here, the mock is not defined to return any value. The setup what we are doing it here. So whatever value we are setting, we are mocking that particular object to return this value whenever someone is calling to this. Okay, now let's create a other example where we are going to understand more details on mock. So in this example, we are going to understand a function where we are going to create a function, and then we are going to mock the behavior of that function or return type of function. So let me create a function, and then I can give test function mock Python, and then I will import unit test. And then so in this, I have defined a function which returns a real value, any string, just dummy value. I'm returning it for from this function. And then I created a simple test class here, and then I am inheriting that test class from test case. And then I defined a test method here where I am just trying to define function here, lambda mock value, and then we are calling that actual function. If you see that, I am calling the actual function here. So when I call actual function, and but before that, what I am doing it, I am just mocking here to return this function always mock value. So what does it do? Whenever I call this function, it will return me this value. It will this mock value. It's not going to return me this value, whatever the function actual function definition is there, since it's a mock. So result equal to mock, and then result we are verifying this mock value. So if I run this code, you'll be able to see this function is mock is working fine. That means it's returning whatever I mocked it here. If you see here, whatever I mocked it, these values are returning. So if I want to test this here, let's say consider real value. Since we are calling this function here, my function we are calling here, and if I put it real value here, what will happen? It will not pass because it's returning the mark value and it will be failed. So in this case, the test case is getting failed because it's not returning that. So now to check that what is the actual function is returning, for example, original function. So if you see original function, how we will define that original function before we assign the mark value. So what I am doing it here, I am uh, assigning my function value to the my original function. So this is how we can directly define a function from execution function in Python. So what we have done it here, I have just created a variable called original function, and then I just assign that function to the existing function called my function, and then I mock that my function value. But in this line, I am calling the original function. So it will return the original function value. That means it will call this function and it will return it. So that's why if I put assert here real value, it will give me the real value and this test case will get passed. So if you change here to mark value, then it will not work because the object is initialized this function variable whatever we have declared it's before the mocking. That's why it's always written. If you see the test case is getting failed because this because the mocking is happened after this function initialization happened. So whatever was there that function, it will be assigned to original function, and then whenever you call this particular object, then it will always return what the value it was returning before mocking. So this is the second one example which we have discussed it here. Now quickly we will try to understand patch and try to understand what exactly patch is and how is it different from mocking. So patch is decorator. We have seen that mocking, we are able to mock it using creating a new mock object in different way. Patch is decorator. So what does it means? That we can decorate on top of the test class a particular class or function which will mark the input parameter for that particular function or class. So we will see with example. So uh, patch is basically a decorator and a context manager that allow you to replace an object with a mock object. It's useful when you want to test a function that depend on an object that is hard to create or manipulate in your test environment. So let me create a file, and then we will give that file name is simple patch 1. So we will create a file and we will give a file name is simple patch 1. So we will give test simple patch 1.py, and then we will also import here the unit test mo- unit test module, and then we will write a function. It's a same example what we have done in the previous. Okay, so it's the same example. We have created a function. Here we are having a real value where we have defined the function. This function is simple, it's returning one string. And then what we have it here, we have created a simple test. If you see here what we have done it, we have decorated this particular test class with the patch. So inside that what we have given that this function name, whatever the function name is there, main function name. So what does it give? In the function input parameter, it will give you a mock function object for this function. Now you can set up any return value for that mock object. So I just set up here, you see this input parameter of this function. So if you see here, I have defined a parameter called mock function. This from where it happens? It happens because we have decorated this particular test method with the patch. So whatever the function name we are passing after the main, it will see if that function is available in this class or any of the module which is referred here. In that case, what will happen, it will consider that function as a mock, and then whatever setup we have done in this context, it will, whenever you call it, it always return you that mock object value. So here we declare a patch, and then here we are doing the setup. This line is doing setup for mock value, and then we are asserting this value here, and then we are calling our main for the test. So if I run it here, okay, so this is how this works. And if I want to change this value, let's say consider I want to put a certain real and try to run it, this test case will fail because real will never call, it will always mock. So what happens, this we are testing this by mocking this my function. So whenever this my function is getting called, that time it will be always returning the mock value. Actually, it's not going to call that function at all, it's just mock that. Okay, so this is how a simplest way to use the patch by using a decorator. This is how we can use it. We will take another example to understand patch in more detail. So I'm going to create a same function, a class now, and in that class I'm going to define attributes, or let's say consider a property, string property, where we are going to mark that property. So I create a test patch 2.py, and then in this example what we have done it, we have created a class, and this class contains attributes. That attributes is a string type which returns a real value. We can hard code any value, and then I have created a simple test class which is called test simple patch 2, and then it's inherited from the test case, like simple unit test, how we used to write it using unit test module in Python. This is the test case method which we have, test case function, where we have written it, and this function we have decorated with the patch. In this patch, if you see the main, and then we have defined the class name, what is the class name here, and then attributes, whatever attributes we want to mark it. So I have given the attributes name here, and then the second parameter what we need to pass it, what is the mark value you want to get, do that. For example, whenever in during the test context, if some calls is getting called to that attributes, you want to return this value. So it will always during this test context and during this test execution, whenever I call this my class, that my attributes, then it always give me a mock value because the patch is defined here to mock that. So we have decorated with this class, we have decorated this class with the patch, and we have defined if my attributes is getting called during this test context, then return this value. So when I run this code, you will be able to see this test case is getting passed. So for example, if I change this value to real value, let's say consider any value, and then I run it, my test case will fail because it does not equal. So that means whatever we are marking using patch or decorator, it's working fine. And if I run it now, you will be able to see this test case is getting passed. So this is about the patch. Now we will try to understand the magic mock, and we will try to go through a example using magic mock. Magic mock is a subclass of mock that allow you to automatically create mock objects with all the methods and attributes of a object that are replacing. It's useful when you want to create a mock object that closely resembles to the real object. For example, let's say consider if you are having a class which contains 10 method or 12 method or n number of method and attributes. You do not want to mock one by one, and you do not want to set a value for each individual, because you have a requirement to mock that complete class and use it in your test context. In that case, we will use magic mock. So we will see how this magic mock works. If you are able to see this example, in this example, we have used similar kind of example, but we have a look on patch and mock. So this is a class where we have created a class which contains a method which returns a string. And then we have created this a test class, and then we have used a magic mark here. So magic mark, what we need to define, we need to just define, specify specification equal to class, my class, whatever the class you want to mark it. And then this line will not require any additional line for mocking, for example, decorating this and decorating with the patch or any other setup is required on that. Now once you do that, the complete class will get mocked, and then this variable whatever you have declared here, it will be a mock and mock object, and you can set up the value to that particular mock object. So for example, in this mock object, my method which is available in my class, my method, and then I am setting that my method to return mark whenever it's called during this test execution. So this is how we can set it. This is called array. Now if you go on this section, we are calling this, when we call it, since we are setting a value this mock and we are putting a short on mock, this test case will pass. Let's run this test case and we'll see that how it's getting passed. Now if you comment this two line of code, that means for mocking this code, I will comment this for time being and run this. I will just run this. It's get failed because the result is real now. If I push real here, it should pass. So now it's getting pass. Okay, so in this way, what will happen? In this way, you can mock the complete class which contains n number of function attributes, and then set up based on your requirement what you want to set up. So that's what the mock, patch, and magic mock objects are there. So I hope you understand that at high level what is mock, patch, and magic mock. If you like what you see, please consider subscribe my channel and support us to grow. Thank you so much. To understand what is the advantage of mocking in Python or any programming language, we will go through this particular scenario and use case, and we'll try to understand how is resolving the problem for unit testing. Let's say consider we have a application or code, or let's say consider a class which you are writing. It calls a third party service. For example, in this scenario I am calling a this particular URL. This URL you consider this is API, and this function also contains some logic. After getting the data from the Google, you are trying to do some business rule applied over there, or you are doing some logic over there, and then you are returning that. Now the scenario is that you want to test this function without calling this external services, because this is external services. You want to test only the code what is what is there after the service call, and you want to make sure that this code is working fine. That means the highlighted line, this is just a simple code, so you can consider that this is highlighted line. You want to test it. Once you get a response and whatever you are applying the business rule is working fine or not. In this case, if you don't mock this service call, what will happen? Every time when your test runs is going to call this particular service. So this is where the mocking, this kind of scenario where the mocking is required. So in this case, what we have done it here, we have used pass, and then we have mocked this request.get, and we are saying that in this line, whenever this get calls, then request.get calls, then I want to return this my object. So then Whenever I'm calling this function in my test context during the test execution, it will always return this value, and I'll be able to change this value to different value and test all the scenario, whatever complex logic I have written here, without calling the third party service here. So in this scenario, I'm just marking this response of this return value to return this mock response title. And actual call when it goes, it will return a Google title because we are calling Google, and whatever the API is written is written. So since I have mentioned that Google URL, so when you call it, the title will come as a Google. So in this case, whenever you want to test this functionality other than the API call, the logic, whatever you have defined in that particular class, and you do not want to call this API, in that case, we will use the mocking concept like how we have used. We mock it and then we are testing it. So for example, when I run this test case, this test case is getting passed because whatever assert be, this test case is getting passed. So for example, whatever I have in this logic, if you see, if it's return, if its API returns is titled Google, then it's saying valid user, otherwise it's saying as an invalid user. So in my test case, I'm trying to test the invalid user scenario where I'm passing the invalid user title. So for example, if I pass this information here in my mock result, mock setup, then I'll be able to, this test case will get failed because whatever setup is there, I am not getting it. So if you see, it's failed because it's not returning invalid. So in this case, this will return a valid user because this satisfy the condition of the title check whatever we have done it here. So now it's getting passed here. Okay, so just to revisit this, whenever you have external dependencies and you during our unit tests, you do not want to call that external dependencies because you want to test only the unit of code which you have written. Now we will talk about what is the advantage of using mock, patch, and magic mock. So there are few advantages. For example, isolation. By using mark patch, you can isolate a specific part of the code that you want to test it. It can make easier to identify uh, issues, and you can do a testing of a particular component even though it's a depend on any other component by using mock functionality or mock behavior. Flexibility, flexibility like with patch or mock, you can replace any object or function in your code even if it's a deeply nested or hidden behind a layer of abstraction. This can be particularly useful when testing complex system or APIs. Speed, patching can faster than other method of replacing objects during testing. This can be particularly useful when you are working with the slow resources insensitive part of your code. Simplicity, mocking will make your test case very simple. Let's say consider if you want to mock any object without using this mocking libraries or module, your code will extend in exponential. That means you need to write lot of code and your user defined function to mock this, and certain scenario it will be not possible to mock it even though you put lot of efforts are there. So the mocking, whenever you have a dependent component and you want to test it, it's always useful to mock the all the dependencies with the current class or object or component what you are going to use it. Since unit test is focused only for the functionality which currently working on that or currently you are testing, you need not to worry about the other functions or behavior of the system. You have to just focus on the only current class or object which you want to test it. So that's how you can mark all the dependency and you can test it. Thank you so much. for watching this video. I hope you like. If you like, please do press subscribe button. Thank you.